Welcome back, everyone. We're here at the Green Talent Forum on Localized. We're so excited to have you here talking about career insights, job trends, and opportunities in sustainability. Today, we have Sam Rubin and Elizabeth Cohen-Martin with us. We are talking about sustainable design, construction, and all the counterparts that go into it: tech, organic materials, innovation. And if you haven't been with us today, the Green Talent Forum is a space where you learn from the experts. We're happy to be brought to you by our partnership with the Posterity Institute and Planet 2049. And a big shout out to our sponsors at Meshad El Fatam, who, if not for them, this event would not be possible. So thank you so much. Just to get started, let's give you a little bit of background on Sam Rubin and Liz Cohen. Sam Rubin currently works for Mighty Building Company. It's actually his company that he co-founded. He's also on the World Economic Forum as a G20 Sustainability Task Force Core member, which we'll talk a little bit about. Elizabeth Cohen-Martin is an architect, educator, and urban systems specialist with a strong background in research and development of alternative materials and sustainable systems for a variety of different projects. We are so excited to have you both on, and I'd love to give you an opportunity to give us a little bit of background on each of you. Sam, if you could start us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, about Mighty Buildings, and about how you got into the sustainable construction space in the first place?
By accident, I swear. But yes, happy to. Proud to be one of the co-founders of Mighty Buildings. We're a construction technology company based in Oakland, California, that has developed 3D printed panelized construction system for resilient regenerative homes. We're currently getting close to finishing the world's first zero net energy 3D printed community in Southern California, and are moving forward on a number of initiatives to get our embodied carbon down below zero, and really looking at how do we develop resilient housing that is well suited for the realities of the climate crisis, whether that's fire resistance, wind resistance, flood resistance, etc. Now, my journey, I can say that of the co-founders of Mighty Buildings, I have the most experience in construction. I built sets every day after high school for theater.
No way. That's interesting.
Yeah, like legitimately. So like after high school, probably was equivalent apprentice carpenter, but never thought I'd be in construction. Thought I was going to be a lawyer. So I did poli-sci econ undergrad, ended up taking the LSATs and was working in interfaith peace building. When I decided maybe I didn't want to be a lawyer, so instead went and got a dual MBA, MPA, so Master's of Business and as well as a Master's of Public Administration, with a focus on sustainable management from Presidio Graduate School here in the Bay Area, which is one of the first programs in the world to center the entire curriculum on systems thinking and sustainability. So that amazing decision, one of the best things I did. After that, after graduating, did some work in brand strategy and design work, which was wonderful, but was spending way too much time on the back end of Squarespace sites and not nearly enough time really helping companies and organizations be more sustainable or effectively tell their sustainability story. So decided to become a sustainability consultant, helping organizations identify opportunities for bottom line savings through reductions in waste, water, energy, transportation, everything from looking at the exterior of a building with a FLIR camera to identify thermal leakage, to doing a deep dive into the electricity bills to see if there's random spikes at 2 a.m, to moving a garbage can 10 feet and modeling out what the impacts are. And then taking all that and turning it into a business case. So helping whoever I was working with make that business case up to C-suite by showing the return on that investment, by showing that payback period. Oh, and by the way, you also have all this brand value add because of all these sustainability aspects, but really focusing on that business case, because you never know when someone's going to have a negativity bias towards climate crisis for whatever reason. And so by leading with the business case, you can really kind of sidestep that and allow them to see value where they might have tuned out otherwise. And was doing that when a former classmate of mine posted on one of our Facebook pages that she was at Indiegogo at the time, that a couple of founders she'd worked with were looking for someone to help with regulatory compliance, market research, as well as sustainability, and on a 3D printing project. And my capstone on the MBA side, me and my team had taken clean virgin plastic waste from hospitals and turned that into printer filament. We hadn't gone forward with the idea because it was all polypropylene and there's just not really a polypropylene filament market, but really a fascinating foray into 3D printing, which I've been in love with ever since I realized that Star Trek replicators are just atomic or molecular level additive manufacturing with energy modulation. Yes, I am that big a nerd. But so with and so met with
It's
the
a nice
founders of
happy
Mighty.
accident.
Exactly. So met with our founding CEO and CTO. They shared the vision with me, and because of that belief in that 3D printing can be basically a replicator, I already was like ready to accept that 3D printing can be anything as long as we have the right tools, the right inputs, and the right way to put them together. So applying that to construction to help address the lack of productivity in the industry, to address the realities that 40% of global emissions are tied to the built environment, and really figuring out what's it look like to bring new thinking into the space that can help us address those big issues. Because the reality is the built environment is one of the largest levers we have. And so that's how I found myself in construction. Not a direct line, but I'm also a big believer that never thought I would have a traditional career. I vote my idea of a good career is one where I keep doing things that I find interesting that feed my soul, and hope that one day I find something I love and want to do for the rest of my life, but also being totally okay not finding that one thing and just going from thing to thing to thing to thing. So I big believer there's no such thing as the right career path. There's only your career path. And so it's, I think, figuring out what that looks like for you and what feeds your soul is critical.
And we're actually going to be talking a lot about that. The hopping from career to career is perfect, especially for our audience that's like, what should I do after graduation? And the answer is you don't have to know. But Liz, I'd love to know from you, I mean, how does an architect end up finding her way into the sustainability space of all spaces in such the beginning or crux of this industry even becoming an industry? Can you talk to us a little bit about your journey?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here speaking with Sam and with you, Selma. This is great. Thanks for the invitation. My name's Liz, or Elizabeth Cohn Martin. I lead our research and development efforts at Roth Architecture, and currently I'm also our sustainable design lead. So I'm branching between two firms. We have our architects and our innovation and technologies firm, and I help support in both of those areas. My story is a little bit different, but kind of similar in terms of bringing together a lot of different interests that I was focused on at a young age. So I believe that my passion for sustainability really started when I was at UC Berkeley. I've gone through a lot of education. I think, you know, we all have in the industry, and I completed my undergraduate work at UC Berkeley in architecture, as well as my graduate studies at Columbia University in New York at GSAP, all of which I look back on really fondly. But it's when I was at UC Berkeley undergrad that I feel like I really became quite passionate about sustainability and what we're now calling having a soft touch or having a soft footprint. And as a young person, you know, before going to school, I was always really interested in the arts, in making things with my hands. I love to paint. I love to make different sculptures as a very, very young girl. And I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Chicago. And my parents always sent me to summer camps during the summer, which was lovely. It was one of my most favorite activities to do, right? And so when I got to school as an undergrad, I felt very strongly about arts. And I also felt very strongly about nature, being in the out of doors, being in different cultural, natural spaces that mean a lot to us. And so I came in and I was studying anthropology and art of all things. And I loved it, but that eventually progressed to astrophysics. I realized I really loved math. I really loved physics. I was like, I want to build, right? I want to make something. And then that felt a little dry to me and a little too mathematic. And I was like, uh-oh, it's not this. And so I kept working down the list, and I finally got to architecture. You know, I worked through the A's: anthropology, art, astrophysics, architecture. I got to architecture and I was like, boom, this is it, you know, because it merged a lot of these different things together. And I love that. I love that, you know, being an architect was not only something that I could study, you know, architecture, but I could be it. I could build with my hands. I could integrate math and physics. I could integrate elements of ecology and being in nature, being in the out of doors. I could integrate elements of culture, of anthropology, and of history, and pull this all together into this very nicely packaged profession, career path. And that at the time it felt very exciting to me. It felt also a little bit wild, because to really be able to pull all these things together. And of course, you're at that point, in many people's educational paths, you're still perhaps on the younger side of things, you're figuring it out. And it really excited me. And so that's, where I went. And as I was finishing my degree at Berkeley, I pushed the university at the time to allow me to complete an undergraduate thesis. And I believe that they still aren't really doing this at Berkeley, not for the undergrads, for the grad students, definitely. But they accepted, my proposition, and they allowed me to spend a full year studying the Ganges River Delta in Bangladesh. And I was able to go to Bangladesh to meet with some different educational groups, community groups there, the Brock University. And I spent some time there, and I was able to put together some different design proposals for the region, for Dhaka, for some of the regions to the north and to the south as you're moving through the Delta. And being there, being able to experience that environment, and that climate, and work with the different groups that I've been able to get in contact there really felt inspiring to me. Like, it was clear to me that I wanted to pursue architecture, but with a little bit of a slant, I wanted it to be focused on resiliency. I wanted it to address issues that at the time, and still very much so today, seem very glaring, very apparent, continuous, evolving to me. And that was definite and meaningful. And it took me a couple of years after that, but eventually I made it back to school for more school. I ended up at Columbia, New York City in 2013, exactly 10 years ago, kind of to the month, which is wild. And I started with the MSUP, the urban planning program there, and the architecture programs. It was hard for me to split building and city. It was like, well, you can't have the city without the building, but you can't have the building without the city and the system. They're intertwined, right? There's a language there. There's a dialogue and a relationship, and the two go hand in hand. And so I moved forward with those 2 degree programs. And at the time I was assistant teaching. And I started in the sustainability management program with a professor who's become a dear mentor named Lynette Witter, who's still teaching in that program. And then I also moved into the architecture and the urban planning programs in GSAP, assistant teaching there as well. And I was working with Shanta Tucker of Atelier 10, who's been very, very impactful on my career. And we were supporting the entry-level grad students in terms of understanding building systems. And at the time, these were grad students who were coming in, some of whom had a background in architecture and some of whom did not, super fresh. And so the course was geared towards folks who were fresh to the industry, right? And needed to start to have an idea of not just how to design beautiful, innovative structures and proposals, but also understand how they function and how they work, how they run. And so that became my role. And it was very apparent to me in that moment how much I love teaching, how much building sustainability, building systems meant to me. And I've gone on to continue that career path in terms of teaching. I teach sustainable design at a school in Asaf now called the AAU. And I've been there for a number of years, teaching primarily undergrads, but also grad students in sustainable design. I've had a number of different, more standard architectural positions as well, both in New York City as well as San Francisco. And of course, most recently, I've arrived to Mexico, to Tulum. You can see the background photo here. This is one of our sites in the middle of the jungle, right off the coast of Tulum.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and I've been with the company for 3 years now. So my career has progressed internally within the company, but that's a little bit of a separate story.
Beautiful. And we'll touch on that.
Yeah.
But in terms of kind of taking it back to design specifically and talking a little bit more about how technology is kind of utilized in this space. Sam, I want to pose the question more so around what Mighty Buildings does. So you utilize advanced technology like 3D printing and robotics, but can you talk to us about how this technology enhances sustainability in the construction space? How is it more efficient? How is it making improvements than just traditional methods, even where they're, recycling waste, or what is it that actually makes your technology something that creates a more sustainable planet?
Yeah, happy to. So what we're doing is pretty unique. A lot of the 3D printed construction that people are seeing out there is generally on-site printing that's being done with concrete. What we're doing is off-site using photopolymers, so a little bit different. So what that means is that our material hardens using light, so which allows it to harden almost instantaneously. And so what that allows us to do is really print unique designs, unique shapes, and do things you just simply can't do with on-site concrete, but also allows us, because of the off-site aspect, to really go a step further. So off-site construction is already significantly more sustainable than on-site construction from a waste perspective, even if you're using traditional methods, simply because it's a lot, you're not ending up with a situation where you've got, 1 foot piece here, 2 foot piece there, that's just all going to waste. Everything is really much more designed and cut exactly what's needed. So you're already reducing waste there. With 3D printing, we're able to take that even further because we print exactly what we need and nothing more. So that means that we're not in a situation where we're generating tons and tons of waste. I mean, I think on a traditional build in America, the best data I've seen is like 3 to 5 pounds per square foot that goes to landfill from traditional build. And so we're less than 1% of that. We're not quite zero waste production because we still do print a little bit that we then cut off and things like that. But we're near zero waste production, which is significant, and that in and of itself has a huge impact in terms of overall emissions because so much is tied to landfills. But where we are currently, and we're admittedly kind of in our electric vehicle phase, insofar as what we're deploying is significantly more efficient than non-zero net energy homes. So we're able to, in a single panel with basically 2 materials, print print the walls and then fill that with insulation and achieve energy efficiency levels that exceed California's very stringent Title 24 energy efficiency standards. And in some cases, we haven't certified it, but some of the units we've delivered in Southern California could even qualify for Passive House. So there's really some great opportunities there. And because of the efficiency of our system, using the robots, using automation to address the lack of skilled labor, it allows us to deploy zero net energy homes that are cost effective against non-zero net energy homes. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, to make a home zero net energy, you basically just need to have the right amount of renewable energy and storage on site, but the size of that system matters. And so the more efficient your building is, and from the beginning, the smaller the amount of renewable energy and storage is required. And that's a significant cost factor. Where we're going is that because admittedly, our embodied carbon is currently higher than we want it to be. But that's something we're working on. We've got an amazing sustainable materials team that's doing some work that I wish I could talk about, but I can't. So you'll just have to stay tuned. But we're actively working on getting to carbon neutrality because we feel it's critical that the built environment not only is energy efficiency, but is also helping sequester carbon from the atmosphere. And to that end, I've actually last year stepped back into an advisory role at Mighty Buildings, so I'm no longer involved in day-to-day operations, to focus on embodied carbon policy. Because I think that's a really, really big part, and kind of for us was a way of making a statement about what we're doing, even though we're not there yet. And so we were the driving force behind AB 2446 that passed here in California last year, which is the first bill in the United States to require mandatory reductions in the embodied carbon of building materials for private as well as public construction. So it goes well beyond the Buy Clean Acts that were kind of the forebearers of that. And this year, we're behind AB 43, which is currently on Governor Newsom's desk, and that adds a trading mechanism that was originally part of 2446, but was stripped out. That allows that adds for further flexibility in that compliance, but also incentivizes overcompliance. So we're really big believers in the role of new technologies in delivering energy efficient homes that are also resilient in the face of fires. So 1 2-hour fire rated assemblies that can withstand hurricane force winds. I mean, we design our homes to the Miami-Dade hurricane code that can withstand the wind and fires in California, that can be water resistant, that can be resistant to antimicrobial. I actually spent a couple months in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina back in 2005, and the neighborhood I was in was Lakeview, and it was inundated with 16 feet of water for 3 weeks. So I've seen firsthand that even if a home, even if a home is still standing, it could need raised just because of the mold, because of the microbial growth. So for us, creating a material that's resistant to that can be flooded and still be viable as a home was also very important, because the impacts of the climate crisis on housing aren't just when homes are destroyed or taken or like wiped off the face of the earth, but also can be they get moldy and no longer livable. And so there's a lot of other aspects that go into what makes a resilient, sustainable home that we're really focused on.
And that
Sorry, it was all
actually,
over the place in that one. But
no, actually, that's a perfect segue, because one of the things that we want to talk about is just in terms of having sustainable materials, right? There's a lot of challenges that might be specifically for the areas or the regions or the countries that are in more tropical climates, like Tulum or like the deserts of Saudi Arabia, right? And so, Liz, can you talk to us about some of the challenges with incorporating organic or sustainable materials into buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, and it's definitely something that's near and dear to my heart personally, and the office. But we do believe that a building needs to have a relationship first and foremost with the space that it's ideally built within. Like I said, our office is located off the coast of Tulum. We are definitely in the tropics. We're quite literally in the jungle of the Mayan Riviera region. And we like to be sourcing locally, for a number of reasons. It's great because it reduces our environmental footprint. It helps us address issues like time and money and logistics in terms of getting things to us. It also can be challenging, though, and as you're bringing up, which brings up a good design opportunity. In the image behind me, you'll see a local vine that's called Bejuco. And we work with Bejuco substantially in almost all of the proposals. Or if we're on a site, perhaps like Alula and the KSA, we might look for something that's the equivalent. So Bejuco is an interesting material in that its water content varies over time. And when it's more moist, you can easily wrap it. You can weave with it, you can bend it, and you can work with it in different decorative ways. And we put it just about everywhere, and we utilize it abundantly throughout our spaces. But over time, the Bejuco does need care and it needs maintenance. Usually for Bejuco that's applied in an exterior environment like this here, we'll be maintaining it maybe every 6 months or so. And then if it's in an interior space, every 3 to 4 years. But we understand that there are these kind of trade-offs between working with something organic, working with something natural, and needing to give it a little bit more care and a little bit more maintenance. And we think that this is actually beneficial in terms of enabling a user engagement, with the space, or an owner engagement with the space. That is contextual and it's related to the site and it's about the site. We have extremely high humidities in this region. We have a 100% relative humidity more days out of the year than I care to mention. We also, Azulik, our coastal hotel and resort space, is right next to the ocean, right? So you have saltwater spray and you have that impacting the wood and impacting the structures. So everything does need a level of engagement that, is par for the course. And we absolutely view this as a design opportunity. Natural materials have lifespans. The material will modify over time and we need to be aware of that. In the KSA, it's a similar but a different story, right? It's a very different climate, a very different context and different environment. And so there, when we're thinking about contextual materials, if you've seen any of the publicly available renderings that have come out, you'll see some of those materials and they're related to the space. Some of them are more vernacularly appropriate, historically vernacular and modern vernacularly appropriate. And with those in mind, we're thinking about the dry environment, the amount of solar gain that those materials might get, the impact from UV, the impact from heat, from wind, from sand abrasion, getting picked up in the air and hitting the materials. And so all of that comes into play. But, like I said a moment ago, everything to us seems to be a design opportunity. And we can look back for, historically contextual examples of how the materials have been utilized over time, because there's a rich history, right? Especially in Saudi Arabia, in the KSA, of working with natural materials like natural clay plasters and adobes. There's a very rich history of that. And we can either look back historically or focus on a new suggestion, a new innovation for how to enhance lifespan or work with a maintenance cycle that can be addressed within the building use cycle, or we can merge the two together, right? We can look at a historical advancement or a historical technique that was used, and then more modern solutions and innovations, and merge those together to come up with a really site-appropriate stance on how to utilize the materials. So yeah, two very, very different environments. One is extremely humid, the other is very dry, gets rain maybe 4 or 5 days a year. So very different environments, but similar approach to looking contextually for an appropriate material palette, and then going from there and seeing what's possible.
Yeah, and we're doing something similar actually, because our right, even though right now all our primary production is in Monterrey, Mexico, at our facility there, longer term, that's going to become a factory of factories, because our vision is to have distributed production that's localized in areas where we have high demand, rather than shipping panels around the world, which opens up opportunities for localizing supply chains. So one of the things that we're looking at, because we do have some great conversations going in the Middle East, is what might it look like to utilize desert sand as an input, as a material, since it's ubiquitous, significantly more sustainable than river sand, significantly lower cost, and has a variety of other factors that we're really looking at. So we can use that as a significant portion of our material. So I think that even in a very modern kind of technology forward context, there's huge opportunities for localized materials and otherwise working within that local context that can be really powerful.
Absolutely.
And actually, just to dive deeper on that subject, can you talk to us or explain the concept of the life cycle assessments? And so in construction, like the significance of it to, I see your smile. I know you love this topic, Sam. Its significance in sort of reducing environmental impacts.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to get Liz's take on this as well. But life cycle assessments at this point are one of the most powerful tools we have in reducing the embodied carbon and the operational carbon of buildings. Because the reality is, if you're not thinking about those things until you're building it, it's too late. You've already, because if at that point, if you're going to incorporate it, you're adding significant cost, significant time. But if you're designing for it from the beginning, you can identify really low cost, super efficient solutions that can be incredibly beneficial to the project. But to do that, you need to model out what are those impacts. And this is where whole building lifecycle assessments become very, very important. Essentially, what you're doing is you're using the best available data, ideally from a third-party verified environmental product declaration, which is basically what it sounds like, a statement of the environmental impacts of a material that's been verified by someone other than the people making it, which you'd be surprised how many are not verified. So be careful there. But essentially what it does is allows you to kind of identify all the different pieces and add up all that carbon and as well as toxic chemicals, other impacts as well, and then figure out, well, if we design it this way, what's that going to look like? What are we expecting that carbon to be? What are we expecting the cost of that to be? Because there's a lot of different ways you can do whole building life cycle assessments. One, you can do just carbon focused. You can do what's called a life cycle cost assessment that also begins to bring in costing factors, including in maintenance. It's such a fascinating space right now with the rise of building information modeling and so much more detail on the data about materials, but then also just what we're seeing with the rise of carbon accounting requirements and more opportunities to begin to push this forward. So it's a really powerful tool that I think is a really great space for folks who are interested in that type of stuff to be getting into, because I'm seeing more and more entry-level opportunities focus on life cycle assessments, because admittedly, it can be a little tedious. So it's often junior folks who are the ones who are actually doing the detail work. But as you gain an understanding of it, and it just opens up so many possibilities. And this isn't something that's specific to buildings. I mean, you can do a life cycle assessment for anything. And you just need to be really good about understanding what are the boundaries on that, because the reality is the system keeps going. I mean, in theory, you could do a life cycle assessment in the universe, but anyway, but that's just unfeasible. So knowing where those boundaries are to cut things off, and also understanding what that means and be able to talk about the impacts there, because it can get really nuanced and really messy. But it's really important, and as of now, maybe the best tool we have for really understanding the environment, the impacts of the built environment and other products. But yeah, Liz, I would love to hear your take on LCAs.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I'm sitting here nodding a lot. My head's just moving up and down. I really couldn't agree more. I mean, for me, this is hitting home both in terms of the work with RA, but also my teaching work at the university, you know, where we are trying our best to be introducing as many of these techniques as is possible, and not just introducing them theoretically, but enabling the opportunity to, you know, to test them out, to run, you know, a mini energy analysis using a suite of different softwares, to look at if you apply one material through X number of walls in Revit, to hook that up and to start to actually analyze your embodied carbon, right? Where we're trying to get this integrated into educational opportunities more as like a process that's built in, and less as like an add-on or something that you do after the fact, right? As Sam mentioned, like if you're already entering into construction and you're like, oh, I should have thought about that, like you've missed an opportunity, you know? And that's not saying that, you know, you can't still make an impact. Like, absolutely, please, 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 by all means, like try to do what you can. But you know, the goal of the tools is to be doing them as much upfront in your design development process, and ideally to be doing this as an integrated team. You know, not only do you have your architect or your lead consultant on the project, but you want all of your primary subs to also be involved, or whomever needs to be involved in that team should be involved. And you know, it's an integrated process, it's an integrated methodology. It can go on forever. It can absolutely go on forever. The data nerd internally in me really loves that. Like, I love the endlessness of it. And I think it can also be really overwhelming. So I believe that it's super important within a project. Perhaps, you know, you might not have the staff hours, you might not have the manpower per se, but you know, it's important to set your constraints and then get really clear about what parameters, what metrics you're wanting to be tracking, you know, and at what phase you're wanting to be tracking impact. If you can't do an entire LCA, do a partial LCA. If you have a major project and you're the team leader or the senior PM on the project or what have you, you know, and you have some budget, outsource a separate consultant to be running your LCA, you know, that can be really, really helpful. And this is an entire field, right? This is an entire world right now professionally that you can go into. The data, the quality of the data that we have is a long and separate conversation. You know, you want ideally we want peer-reviewed, verified data and information. And sometimes there are just huge question marks, you know, there are holes within the system. And this is inevitable when you have thousands and thousands of different material options that are being produced. But I think it also says something for simple and elegant design solutions where perhaps you're not utilizing 100 different materials in your project, but you have a design palette that you can analyze with greater ease. You know, you know the impact of your project better. And I think that it can be a sign if all of a sudden we get overwhelmed by the number of the materials in our project that we're trying to track. It could be a sign that perhaps the project is overcomplicated, over-engineered, could be simplified, right? And so there are a lot of different aspects here that we can discuss. But, you know, my short answer is that LCAs and EC assessments are so necessary right now, so necessary.
And
Yeah, and
oh,
thankfully
go ahead.
there's new tools that are making it easier. There's the EC3 database that's it's controlled by buildingtransparency.org. It was originally created by the Carbon Leadership Forum, Skanska, and Microsoft. And that's at this point probably the world's best database of building specific environmental product declarations. And the best part about it, they made it open source. So it's now being brought into a lot of different systems via API. So one thing that Building Transparency did was a Revit plugin called TallyCat that is an embodied carbon estimator that plugs directly into Revit. There's the Beam estimator, which is another tool that similarly plugs in. You've got tools like Cove.tools and others that are using that EC3 or tangible materials, using EC3 database to plug that into marketplaces. So you can look at materials by embodied carbon, or look at building information modeling with embodied carbon estimates in there. So it's a great time to be in the space because of the exciting technology that's making it easier. I mean, when I started doing LCAs 10 years ago, oh my, getting that data, like it's like most of the data was me making it up and being like, this is how I did this estimate because this data doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But now it's becoming so much easier to get, which is critical, and I think a really exciting thing for accelerating the deployment of LCAs in the space.
And I mean, I think both of you have talked a lot about like different technologies, services, protocols, processes that are coming out into play. But a lot of these, as I'm sure you're seeing, Liz, are not in or are a part of the education system right now. So then you have designers, people that are working in the field of construction, building, coming out of schools, not really knowing any of these processes, not really knowing how to use any of the tools that you're talking about, whether it's TallyCat or Beam Estimator, they just don't know. And so what would be your insights into, as somebody who's graduating, let's say in the field of architecture or in any other space, how can they best prepare themselves if they're looking to be in a career that is within the sustainability sector? If they want to go into this kind of green network, where do they start looking? How do they start developing the right skill sets? Where do they look for the tools that they should actually learn? And are there any certification programs that are out there right now, or is the best way just to get an internship?
This is such a full question. It's a good one. It's, again, I'm nodding my head. Okay, so I think that, you know, we have soft skills, we have hard skills. We have technology and software that we can be learning through a computer, but then we also have this inherent need to actually understand construction and build, you know, understand how buildings are put together. And I think I actually have maybe a little bit of like a different stance. I think right now that universities they're trying to keep up with the software innovations. Some of them arguably are doing a much better job than others. You know, it depends on where you're at in the world and also the focus of that university. Some are still very deep into theory, right? Some are very deep into technology advancements. And so we see difference there. But I would actually, oh, sorry, in the construction point, but I think so on the technology side, schools are advancing this, right? But something that I feel that is actually missing is an understanding of actual construction, of the actual building process and how we build and construct buildings. So my first suggestion is that I think, yeah, sure, internships are great, but there's actually a lot of learning that we can do that's self-directed. We can try to strategize with taking specific classes on construction, on building while we're still in university. There are also programs that are offered, you know, external to the university. They may be through community college, they may be through a separate type of institution that offers classes on construction. But I would try your best to not only take a class on construction, but try to build something, go volunteer for Habitat for Humanity, pick up a tool, right? Like try to build something. And like, honestly, I think that would be my step A that I would always advise and will always advise to students and young people wanting to enter the profession, is just like ground yourself in a sense of how we actually put things together. And then in terms of the technologies and the softwares that are out there, I advise students to really own their software, and not try to do everything, but get choosy about the softwares that work best for you in your process, while you simultaneously pay attention to what else is coming out on the market, and what the industry trends are looking like, what people are regularly using in an office. Revit is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It has highly advanced us. It's a great tool. If you don't know it, start to learn it. You can find an abundance of tutorials online and go from there. I've been teaching a software called Sapphira that's been around for many, many years at this point. It's like it's getting there in terms of the years. It's still a valuable tool. It's very easy to learn on your own, right? You can plug it into Revit. You can run a very basic energy analysis from a single surface mass just to get something fast, right? And these are like quite literally one-click tools. So they're not necessarily that extensive. On the flip side of that, there are tools that are far more extensive that'll take more time to learn. But they're valuable, and you can find the resources publicly available to learn the tool and to get used to it. And especially as a student, student licenses are available for just about everything if you're in the educational realm. So utilize that while you're still a student. It's important.
I think so. There's a lot of ground to cover, I think, in terms of just what students and graduates should do is be looking at the market, get used to specifically one type or one specific tool or software, just so that you have kind of an expertise, but also be looking at the whole market. But out of curiosity, when these things come into action, we had a conversation earlier with two gentlemen who were talking about the solar energy space and designing versus building for it. And they were talking a lot about how the design aspect may be just 5% of the work, but if the implementation goes south because of the design becomes then the most costly. And you have both touched on this in a couple of different ways, but can you speak to us more about the cost risk factor, right? So in terms of design versus implementation, because Liz, you touched on the fact that we need to know how to implement. We need to know more about construction and building. Is that the biggest challenge that's happening right now in this space? Or is it more that the designs may not take into consideration certain protocols or certain engineering requirements that would be needed to build? I mean, what would you say that the ratio is with the challenges that you're seeing right now in sustainable design and construction?
In terms of going from concept or proposal into actual form?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, there are a handful of different things we can talk about. Depending on the municipality that you're in, there are certain regulations, certain codes that you need to meet, and sometimes there a lack thereof. Sam was talking about what's happening in California right now in terms of code and regulation, and it's very, very progressive if we're looking at that in comparison to the rest of this country, the rest of the world, right? And so there might be more progressively stringent codes that you're needing to meet, right, in certain areas. And then in other parts of the world, there are not. There's an interesting example, actually, that I'm seeing right now is, in terms of projects where you start the project, you put together your proposal, and perhaps your client turns around midway through the project and says, hey, actually, let's change this, we need these modifications, right? And, or perhaps, there wasn't a lot of building systems integrated thought up front, and then all of a sudden they try to approach it, at a later design phase. At that point, that's where sometimes we see the impossibility, of advancing the desire, right? And so that's like an example of like either a client wanting to change something in the middle of the project that impacts what was previously proposed, in a way where it reduces the impact of the sustainable design intention. Or we see the example of a client or a developer, coming in mid-project and saying, hey, I'd really like to incorporate this, or I'd like to meet this standard, but the project is too far advanced to actually do the thing that they're now wanting to do. So we can see that happening. And that's, this happens industry-wide. And then I would also say that we see strategies, or maybe it's a material selection or something like this, just getting costed out of the project. If you don't estimate your cost correctly up front, and have your set numbers in terms of what you're trying to build, what you're trying to develop, and all of a sudden you try to change it, there can definitely be cost impact associated with this. And sometimes a developer or client might just not have the budget for certain things, right? And so that gets pulled out. But I think it's, if I'm understanding your question correctly, I think it's, we're looking at a combination of like project management in terms of identifying goals very early on in the project. That's critical. Ideally, you want to have the standard in mind, the sustainability standard that you're trying to meet. You want that upfront, you want to set those goals, you want it integrated, right? Integrated process within your team. And you want to have all that identified upfront. And then, as quickly as possible in terms of budget, you want to be able to estimate, your budget and what you're looking at within a certain set frame, and ideally have that as close to possible, or as close to accurate as you can possibly get it, right? So that you don't see these shifts further down the line. And then depending on your municipality, you might have incentives for doing certain things in a certain way, and that's huge. You might also have disincentives, and we want to fight against that as much as possible, right? And show where the opportunities lie to bring in these innovative strategies and solutions in a way where we're directly addressing climate change.
Yeah. And Sam, would you agree with that, or? Yeah.
Yeah, I would very much agree with that, and also add that it really speaks to the interconnected nature of a building. A building is not a bunch of individual systems that are standing next to each other. They're a wholly integrated single system. And so if I try and make a change here, then that it might necessitate making a change over there, which might necessitate a change there. And so one change, even though it might seem like, oh, we can just swap that out, well, actually could have cascading impacts that mean that your entire timeline, and you basically almost have to go back to the drawing board just to change. And this can be something as simple as changing a bolt, because a single bolt, well, if that's a longer bolt, well, then that impacts what's below it, and so even a simple thing like changing a bolt length could have cascading impacts. And so if you're looking at sustainability, that's why it's so critical to do it upfront and to do it accurately, and really to have, and that's where the data transparency and really having good insight into, well, what is that actual thing look like? And that's another place where offsite construction can also have advantages, because a lot of times it's less I'm going to the local hardware store and grabbing what I don't have for the site that day, and more I've got regular shipments of exactly what I need arriving when I need it. So there's a lot more of that industrialization, and a lot more of learning from advanced manufacturing and other sectors that can be brought in. You're muted, Salma.
Thanks. I forgot how to use Zoom. So Sam, can you also talk to us a little bit more about, or give us some more information on carbon accounting? You had mentioned that earlier, and just the tools that experts are using right now, or have used. That's kind of a hot topic as of right now. Can you speak to us in depth about that?
Yeah. So there's lots of great tools, and I feel like there's more coming online every day. But the one I already mentioned, EC3, which is a database of third-party verified environmental product declarations focused on the built environment. And you can access that through buildingtransparency.org. They're also the developers of TallyCat, which is that Revit plugin that I mentioned. BEAM, BEAM, is another estimation tool that was put out by EBA, the Energy Efficiency Building Association, I believe. It was developed by Chris Magwood, who does some amazing embodied carbon work for Rocky Mountain Institute. We at Mighty Buildings, our LCA partner is One Click LCA, which is a for-profit company, I believe it's owned by Bionova. It's out of Finland. And they're great because they utilize their own proprietary database. They utilize the Gabby database, which is another major LCA database, and I believe they're moving more and more towards incorporating EC3 as well. And they also will develop EPDs for you. They're third-party verified. So because at Mighty Buildings, we're interesting because we're not only doing LCAs on the buildings, we're doing LCAs on new materials as we develop them. And so getting that material verified to be able to incorporate into our building, it gets complicated. So those are some of the major ones. I mean, just LCAs more broadly. I mean, I first learned how to do LCAs on Simple Minds, which is a great, or relatively old, Sustainable Minds, which is another one. I used to teach operations class at Presidio as a TA, and we would always take them through how to do an LCA for a toaster. Great way to kind of get introduced to it. I mean, there's so many others out there, Elizabeth. I'm sure I'm like blanking on all of them.
Nah, you just touched on a bunch. For us in the office, we love EC3. It's such a great database. It's something that I always defer back to. I think the quality is really, really high. I feel confident in terms of referring this data and this information. So I think it's an excellent resource. We're also using Tally. We've looked at Cove. Yeah, there are a number of different ones out there, but for us right now internally in RA, it's primarily EC3 and then Tally.
Okay, beautiful. And we have about 5 minutes left, but we have a lot of questions that we wanted to cover. So since we've touched on skill sets, we've talked a little bit about future trends, we've talked a little bit about sustainable organic material. I want to touch on something quite relevant to our communities that are listening, who are all over the world, right? They're in the Middle East, they're in Africa, they're in Latin America. And something, with sustainable architecture, it often involves this deeper understanding of a local culture or a community, right? And so how then do you, either individually as a company, as an industry, tend to collaborate with local artisans or builders to create a structure that then resonates within a community, within the people that are actually living there? Are there specific processes or protocols like you were talking about, Liz, or is it something that's specific to each organization as they're building? Can you each share a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a great question. And I think that every company approaches this a bit differently. And that it very much depends on, where your company is located and what resources and community groups and community organizations, both, formal and informal, that you and the community have access to. At RA in Mexico, we're in a very unique and also deliberately unique position. And that not only do we have an architecture department within the company, but we have a number of different creative groups or ateliers that are actively pursuing in-house construction, as well as our whole Fab Lab team that's more focused on material fabrication, production, prototyping. We have many different arts teams that are focused on ceramics, on fashion, on weaving, on glass, on metalwork, just to name a few of those creative groups, and they're all under this umbrella of Azulik and Roth architecture. And so internally, we're very fortunate, we have all of these different internal built enterprises, so to speak, that are very, very creative. They are local, and we're working with different artists and different folks that are here, that are with us on this site in Tulum. And if we're looking at the history of the company, any structures that have been built and produced by RA have been entirely generated with teams that are local to the region. So all of the decorative artistry techniques that we see utilized within the construction is coming through local building knowledge. You know, we work with trees in the region, we work with vines, with plants, with materials that we have here regionally. And this is all done with local builders and craftspeople. And our buildings up through this point, you know, have been almost entirely built by hand. So they're spaces that are very local and they're very contextual. And as a company, we're seeing a little bit of a big transition, not a little transition, but a big transition into wanting to work with and starting to work with advanced fabrication techniques. And so we're starting to bring machines into our processes, all different types of tools that we're utilizing within our fab lab. And we're seeing how it's really leveraging our capacity. And it's helping us to save time, save money, save material, lighten our footprint. And it's very, very cool to start to see this interconnection between the hands-on crafted work and then these advanced technological systems and machines that are coming together to like co-produce. So the short answer to your question is that there is no, one size fits all type of, step that you go through in order to work with local groups. But I think it's very much dependent on your site, your client, where you're located within the world. And you ultimately want to see what's there, right? You want your building to connect with the culture and the context of the place that you're building and that you're in, and ultimately to have as light a footprint and be as efficient as possible, And if you find different moments or opportunities to engage with community groups that are there, with artistic groups that are there, take those opportunities. It really brings about an important richness to the experience of the architecture itself, and hopefully helps the building itself to be more sustainable in the long run.
And Sam, we'll close it out with you. I would love to hear your take on this, because I think you've done a lot of different kinds of works in different cultures and communities. And I'd love to know, would you say that the processes are pretty much the same, or do you have a sort of maybe different perspective or different process that you've seen done in the past?
Yeah, no, I very much agree with a lot of what Elizabeth was saying. And it's interesting because like with Mighty Buildings, for us, it's about supplying whatever portion of the building is necessary. Like, so we're not necessarily, we can do a whole building that reflects the designs that we've done, but we always prefer to work with local architects in the areas where we're deploying these, so that we're making sure, so like we're not just coming in by ourselves and saying, hey, we're going to build something in the UAE. It's where it's like, hey, let's find the right partner, or be approached by the right partner who brings their own understanding of the local context, who has their local connections, who has their local understanding of design needs, and allows us to really focus on the parts that we do really well, 3D printed panels, and do that in concert with bigger system. Like we're big fans of talking about disruption, but disruption through collaboration, and really understanding what does that look like in a local context. And in terms of methodologies that are out there that I've engaged with for kind of contextualizing different things, I'm a bit biased being in the Bay, but I really like IDEO's human-centered design framework. I think it's a really, really powerful tool for really understanding what it is that people actually need, not what we think they need, which is critical and way too often kind of overlooked when you're deploying technologies. Is like, are we doing this in a way that really works? And that's something that we actually, in my work with the World Economic Forum on developing model embodied carbon policies for cities around the world, one of the big things that we're looking at is like, well, what do we say has to be done? And what do we then versus what do we say, well, these are possible ways, different things you can do depending on the local context. Because what we're able to do here in San Francisco is going to be very different than what's maybe able to be done in Durban or Singapore or Mumbai or London, and all because of just the realities of the local context, whether that's regulatory, whether that's market and what materials and technologies are actually available in that area. What kind of involvement do you have from different levels in connection with each other? Like what are incentives, where just, so it's all, again, it comes back to systems and how it's all interconnected. But yeah, really making sure you're creating that space for that local context and engaging and listening. Because at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to, is listening. Is not just saying this is like paying lip service to the idea, but actually hearing what people need and what are those pain points and what are the ways that we can actually go about doing that that's going to work, That's not just going to be someone coming in and saying, this is, hey, cool, let's do it. But how do you actually create that local ownership, that local sense of control, and like it being a part of the community, not just something that was brought in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think there was a lot of valuable information today, but a lot of information I think that isn't readily available out there. I think these conversations are not necessarily at the forefront of, again, the education system for where people are taking in and learning about design and building. But I think this has been a really unique space for us to learn about what the future trends are, what the market's going to look like, and how things are changing. So we really, really appreciate you both being here, your insights, your time, and ultimately your energy. So thank you so much to both Liz and Sam. And thank you to everybody that's been here. A lot of you have been here with us all day, so thank you. All of these sessions are recorded. We're going to be emailing them out to everyone, so you will be able to see them. Sam, Liz, I can't thank you enough. I mean, it's been a really great conversation, and I hope to see you both again soon.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and again, congratulations to all who stayed up all day for this. This is a wonderful event, and really honored to be able to take part.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Take
Thank
care,
you,
everyone. Bye.